Well, good morning, everyone. To those of you that are joining us live and to those of you that are watching the recording in our webinar library, welcome. Our webinar this morning is Understanding and Supporting Grieving Students. I'm David Madison, I'm the Executive Director of the Southwestern Association of Episcopal Schools. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. I'm joined by our Director of Professional Development, Mary Catherine Duffy. Good morning, Mary Catherine.
Good morning.
And a couple of items of housekeeping before we get into today's topic. So if you will use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, if you click on that, that's how you'll be able to ask questions of our panelists today. The chat is also enabled, so feel free to use that as well. If you'd like to make comments, we may toss some resources into the chat stream as well as the conversation goes. So again, welcome. I wanted to make a few comments before we dive in today. This is a difficult topic, but it's one that unfortunately we're seeing more of our schools having conversations about, which is good. Prior to COVID, the challenge of supporting grieving students was always there, but unfortunately we're just seeing more and more of it because of the reality of COVID and because of the number of deaths with COVID. If you have not experienced a death on your campus related to COVID from someone in your community, unfortunately, there's a chance that you will. So that's why we were intentional about wanting to develop some resources to help our schools become places that understand the grieving process and can be safe places for kids as they work through the loss of a loved one. We published a white paper, let's see, it was earlier this academic year on this topic. And one of the pieces of advice in that white paper, you can find that in the document library, but one of the pieces of advice is make sure to build relationships now with some of the organizations in your community that are experts. And that's what we're going to do today. Bose House is one of those agencies that just does amazing life-changing work with families that have suffered a loss. And there are organizations like Bose Place in your area. So in Fort Worth, there's the Warm Place. Wherever you're physically located, there are organizations like Bose Place doing this kind of work. And so it's important that you develop those relationships now so that you know where to go, you know who to call when the time comes to take advantage of some of these resources in a very challenging time. So this is part of our Episcopal identity, is creating safe places for families, places that are nurturing, places where we understand the grieving process and we know how to respond to that. So thanks so much for taking some time to being with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to Mary Catherine to introduce our panelists.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm really, again, like David said, it's unfortunate that this has to be a topic that we are visiting about, but I think it's an important one, and we're honored to have Arlette and Christina here from Bose Place. And this topic, you said that about the different communities. We have bereavement centers here in the Rio Grande Valley. We know that there are children's bereavement centers all over the place. And so I would reiterate that the more you are able to find those organizations in your community, the faster you can learn how to help. So I want to introduce Arlette and Christina. Christina Cipriano and is in charge of the Spanish programs and is the outreach director at Bose Place. And Arlette Rodriguez is a bilingual groups manager. And so I'm going to turn it over to them and let them tell you a little bit more about what they do. Arlette, let's start with you.
Yes. Well, good morning, all. Thank you so much for inviting Bose Place to be part of this conversation that, as mentioned before, it's so important to have during this time. I am the bilingual groups manager at Bose Place. I work with our Spanish-speaking families during our Saturday groups. Currently, right now, we're doing a lot of our support groups, all of our support groups virtual. And I also am the school-based coordinator for our school-based program. So I run several school-based groups at different campuses. Right now, they're also being done virtual. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all and be able to provide some resources as well as some activities that we do with our children and how to support them during this time. Christina?
Thanks, Arlette. And my name is Cristina Cipriano. I'm the Spanish Programs and Outreach Director at Bo's Place. Pretty much I oversee our Spanish language programs and outreach to the Hispanic Latino community of Houston. I've been with Bo's Place for about 6 years now, and am a member of the Board of Directors of the National Alliance of Grieving Children. I'm honored to be with you this morning, and we'll toss it back to Arlette as she kicks us off.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And we do like to preface all of our presentations in the community by acknowledging that although we are attending this training as professionals, we are also humans. So some of what we talk about today may bring up emotions from our own life experience. And we want to recognize that up front and encourage you all to honor anything that comes up for you during this presentation. So please take care of yourself. If you need to step away from the webinar for just a few minutes, please do so. Fidget with something, trying to find a way to ground yourself during this time if any emotions come up during this time. So a little bit more about Bo's Place and what we do. So Bo's Place is a nonprofit organization offering grief support services at no charge for children, families, and adults. Bo's Place is we are in Houston, Texas. And we currently are offering all of our support groups only for online at this moment. So being able to offer these supports for families who are currently experiencing the death of a loved one and come together to talk. I know more now than ever, this support is needed in our community. The mission of Bo's Place is Bo's Place exists to enhance the lives of those who have experienced the death of a loved one. And our motto is where hearts are healed. So we are a bereavement center, so we only deal with death loss, but the grief reactions that we discussed today will apply for other types of non-death related losses. And many of the worksheets that we discuss and provide to you later will also apply across various issues. So we'll be sending out a packet of different activities that you can use or you can share with those who are currently working with students and use this activities to help children during this time. These are also activities that you can do, you could share with family members as well. So being able to provide information to better support grieving children. Knowing that also there's a lot of information regarding we are currently in a time of grieving. There is not only the death of a loved one, but there's also different experiences that we're currently going through, different milestones that we have not been able to celebrate, come together, rituals that the bereaved usually do during this time that very limited to do. So being able to recognize that grief is not only a death loss, but also everything that because of the pandemic, we have not been able to do. A few information about our services and what we do. So we do have an information and referral line. So this is information, a line for anybody who has access to our main number to call. This is definitely, if you don't live in the Houston area, definitely encourage you all still to be able to use this resource. If you need help with a specific situation of a family, I'm not really sure how to support the child or how to go about it, definitely give us a call. We do have licensed professional clinicians on call to be able to answer those questions, direct you to different resources that we have in our library or in the community as well. So being able to use that line to be able to find information about services that we provide and other resources as well. We do have community education training. So what we do, what we're doing today, Bo's Place is one organization here in Houston. And I know the more that we are able to share resources and have these conversations as a community, the better we are equipped to be able to support the bereaved during this time. Like I mentioned, we do offer grief support groups. And also in the midst of this pandemic, we have created a Bo's Place portal. So Bo's Place at Home, where we have gathered information, activities, resources for families and adults, as well as different movie discussion guides that you can work with your students or be able to provide this information over to their family members to have these conversations as a family regarding the person that died and having different activities that they can do as a family as well. So that information, and we can definitely send that link over to you all to be able to access that portal and have the information for those activities. So referring to both, because I know we have different individuals that are viewing this webinar from different areas in our nation, and being able to, if you do have a colleague, family members, or friends that do live in the Houston area, kind of give you just information as to how we can refer. Definitely the main number that we have for both Place is the first step. We do get calls from individuals who are interested in our services. This service is free of charge to families and adults that come to Bo's Place. We do have one main campus here in the Houston area. And for our children death, these are children that come together after they have experienced the death of either a parent, a sibling, or other caregiver or household member. For our adults, it can be any type of any adult over the age of 18, and it can a death of someone who has died close to them. Our family groups are available also in Spanish, and these are peer support groups, which that means that these are support groups where peers come together and be able to talk about the death of their loved one, being able to share similar experience that they're going through. So we don't offer individual counseling or family therapy, but either way, being able to connect them with us, and we can definitely share resources if they're looking for individual counseling to process their grief. So what is grief? So we're going to go over a few vocabulary words that we're going to be discussing today. Let's see here. Hold on just 1 second. So bereavement. That is the broadest of all the three terms that you see in your screen. It's a statement of objective reality of the situation via the loss of a death. So this situation one faces is after experiencing the death. So that's what bereavement, how we define bereavement. With grief, it's the internal emotional response to a loss, and being able to, it's more of a, this is completely subjective. The focus of grief, the focus of this is psychological and also the behavioral responses of the individual. We will be reviewing common grief reactions this morning, and being able to talk to you all what's common and what we often see in children and adults when they're experiencing a loss. And then mourning is the public expression of emotional distress after the death. So there is an obvious overlap between grief and mourning, with each influencing the other. So being able to see that that mourning is more of a public expression, and it is based on their person's cultural values and beliefs, and how they mourn publicly. So we're going to be talking about, so at Bo's Place, we know that grief is a full body experience. Oftentimes the bereaved feel like they are going crazy when their body, mind, and spirit are being affected by the death of a loved one. So knowing that all these reactions are possible helps us as professionals to be able to normalize our clients' grief reactions. So today we're going to be talking about the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, the cognitive, and also the social when it comes to grief and the grief reactions. So beginning with physical, and like mentioned, these are just a list that we see often, that we hear whenever we are talking to families and in our support groups. But of course, this is not a complete list. I know there's a lot more, and like I mentioned before, it's very subjective. Everybody grieves differently. Everybody's reactions can be differently, even if it's the same person that they've lost. Being able to recognize and know that children might react differently, and each family member in the household will be reacting differently to the death of a loved one. So common physical reactions and indicators that we see, appetite changes, fatigue, weakness. We also hear insomnia, not being able to go to sleep at night, having trouble going to sleep, nausea, restlessness, a weight gain or weight loss often is what we hear. This is where you often have children, young students, mention they want to go to the nurse's office because they're having tummy aches or headaches. We know that these somatic symptoms can definitely be related due to the death of a loved one, and their pain sometimes manifests themselves in specific body areas in their body. With this, we do have an activity that we like to do with our students to be able to help them identify different emotions that they have and they experience in their body. This activity is called Where in Our Body. And if I can have Christina show the next, yeah, Where in Our Body. So this is an activity that we do to help children recognize different emotions that they're currently experiencing, being able to let them know where in your body do you feel pain. And sometimes they mention or say, in my heart is where I feel pain, or in my head is where I feel pain. Another reaction that we often hear is anger. So being able to ask them, where do you feel anger? And it's like in my hands or my feet. So being able to help them recognize those emotions that they feel and where do they feel them in their body. So this is an activity sheet that we'll be providing to you all to be able to have that conversation and help students identify where in their body are they experiencing these symptoms and feelings. The next grief indicator is emotional. So we definitely do see that during the death of a loved one, there's a lot of emotions that are definitely very high. Anger, anxiety, crying, fear. There might be some guilt, loss of self-esteem, numbness, shock, despair, sadness, as well as wanting to be with the person that died, wanting to be close to them, wanting to see them again, is what we often hear from students. These grief spasms and grief bursts that we are highly intense and time limited periods of distress. So they can be understandable reactions to reminders of the love of their loved one, or can occur quite unexpectedly and can be confusing as to the cause. So keeping that in mind, when a child comes back after the death of a loved one, understanding that they might have these grief spasms, grief bursts throughout the day. Understanding and knowing that maybe a specific time of a day can be more difficult for the child. So if the student found out that the person died during lunch period, then usually sometimes you're able to see these reactions a lot more, these higher emotion reactions during that time period, because it's kind of a reminder for them that during this time they found out that the person had died. As well as understanding that it can be very simple things, sights, smells that can remind the person of a loved one, that can definitely, the child can definitely show very high emotions during that time period. The loss of self-esteem, this is especially important when working with children. There are a lot of risks for bullying. We often hear and our students mention that they feel lonely in their grief, but they feel that they're the only ones and nobody else is experiencing what they're going through. So that sense of isolation and feeling different is something that we do hear often from students who are currently experiencing a death in their family. An activity that we do with them is the feelings mask. So this is an activity that we help them identify some emotions that they currently hide, right? So when do they put on this mask on of different feelings? So helping them identify what are some feelings that you don't allow others to see? What are some feelings that you tend to hide from others and you tend to hide behind the mask? So this is a great worksheet to be able to talk to children about different feelings. On one side, we ask them to write about what are some feelings that you allow others to see or how others view you. And then on the other side would be basically some feelings that they are hiding from others. In our school-based groups, we use like masks like this. So basically on the outside, we ask them, like I mentioned, what are some feelings that you allow others to see? And then in the inside, we have them identify some feelings that they tend to hide from others. When do you wear your mask, and what are some feelings that you hide during that time? A good conversation starter to be able to help them also identify who can you take your mask off with? So finding that support. Who is that one person you can take off your mask to be able to share what you're going through? And so this is a very great activity to help them identify feelings, and being also able to identify different support that the child can go to in case they need to talk to somebody about their feelings. The next grief indicator is spiritual. So Both Place is a secular organization, which means that we are open to all faiths or no faith, questioning their faith. But we know that the topic of spirituality often accompanies the grief process. This can be a surprising area of distress for the bereaved. Sometimes they are struggling with their previously held beliefs and stop attending services, which sometimes can increase the sense of isolation and the limit of their support network. So the anchor of God or higher power or religious leader after the death of a loved one, the why questions, why did it happen to me? Can be something that the bereaved often are distressed about after the death of a loved one, as well as a challenge of their beliefs and moral systems. And change, like I mentioned, in the religious practices. Sometimes this can increase their faith, but it could also decrease their faith after the death of a loved one. The guilt, the questions about afterlife, and then the search for a meaning in life. Some of the things that we, as helpers, we can also validate what we call in the bereavement world, the extraordinary experiences, including the sense of, for the bereaved, there is a sense of the person's presence, and being able to know that sometimes for our bereaved community, the fact of just taking a walk and seeing a cardinal, for them is a presence, a connection to their loved one. So the sense of a presence of the disease can also provide a sense of emotional, a relief of their emotional suffering, and also a sense of acceptance of the death. So being able to recognize and know that for them, this presence, this extraordinary experience that they're going through is a connection that they might be having with their loved one, and they feel in some way comforted by that. An activity that we do with this is the question mountain. So these are different. We give students an opportunity for them to ask questions about questions they have related to death. Questions they have regarding the afterlife, or questions they have about the death of the person. I know these can be very hard sometimes, as far as finding an answer to every single question. I feel like as adults, I feel that I have to have an answer to everything that students ask, but sometimes it's simply giving them the space to ask questions is what they need, that support that they can receive. But also knowing and mentioning to the students, sometimes we don't have the answers to all the questions, and that's okay. And just giving them the opportunity to share what they have in their mind and kind of speak it out loud or ask can be very helpful and healing for a child to be able to have an opportunity to do. The next grief indicator is cognitive. So this definitely can play a part in a child's daily interaction at school. So the difficulty concentrating, forgetfulness, inattention to details, the lack of initiative, the loss of creativity, the loss of productivity, nightmares, and also overachievement. So like I mentioned, it very much varies upon each child. And there might be some changes that you see in them coming back to school after the death of a loved one when it comes to the cognitive area, and being able to know that these changes can occur, and the child can definitely find a hard time to be able to be focused in their schoolwork. The impact in learning. So temporary academic challenges are common and should be anticipated. Like I mentioned, knowing that the child might be having or might have difficulty concentrating in school, difficulty getting work done. Being able to offer proactively offer support proactively to be able to reduce stress related to academic difficulties is very important. Trying to find ways to how can I help this child? How can I help this student so they can do better in class? Can this be a conversation that we can have as a family and understanding what can we do to help the child succeed academically? Can we give the child extra days to complete a specific task? Can we give the child an extension on a deadline or more time to be able to complete the specific homework? Is it helpful for the child to be able to be removed from that specific space that they're at to a quiet space in a counselor's office or a different teacher's office to be able to focus on their schoolwork? Being able to consider modifications and encourage coping skills. Little things as being able to have a specific signal with the teacher saying whenever they have these very high grief waves of emotion, if I show my teacher my yellow pencil or a specific color pencil, she knows that I need to go talk to somebody, and the child can excuse themselves to talk to somebody or go to take a walk if they're able to, find a way to be able to help them with coping skills and keep them grounded whenever they're feeling overwhelmed. The next one is social. So we do oftentimes children who have no history of this type of behavior of aggressiveness can become more aggressive, or fights can occur after the death of a loved one. We also see clingy behavior. So especially with our younger children, is that fear of wanting to be with the surviving parent because they're fearful that they might lose them too. So we definitely do see parents communicate with us that the child wants to be with them all the time. And that's a very common reaction to grief with our younger children. Fighting, isolation is one. Nonstop talking, trouble relating to other peers. Like I mentioned, we hear a lot in our school-based groups, in our groups at Both Place, children feeling very different and lonely in their grief. Sometimes adults may also isolate themselves to keep their emotions from their children, but also to avoid having to avoid talking to others about their grief. Children often feel isolated and different after the death of a loved one, and so being able to have conversations with parents and how to talk to children after the death of a loved one, and giving them the tools to be able to feel supported, and helping the child also understand and know that they're not alone in their grief, and that there's other kids their age that are currently also experiencing the death of a loved one. On our Both Place at Home portal, we do have different movie discussion guides that we have put up there, uploaded to this portal, that maybe can be helpful. It can be a suggestion that you can give to families, and being able to watch movies together. That most of the movies that we have on there for sure are grief related, and being able to have a conversation or a discussion as a family. I think that's one of the most important things, to be able to allow family members to come together and talk about their grief. Being able to have children identify themselves with specific characters in a specific movie can also be very helpful, and letting them understand and know that they're not alone in their grief, and that there's others who are currently going through that, and to make them feel less isolated, less lonely during this time of grief. Okay. And Christina will be taking over, giving you more information, more specifically breaking it down by age group, and how to support the bereaved student. Christina?
Thanks, Arlette. Thank you. And I just wanted to reiterate, if anyone had any questions, so please feel free to use the Q&A feature, because we want to make sure that all the information that we're providing is helpful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to plop them into the Q&A. We'll definitely have time at the end of the presentation to go through it. So what we wanted to start with and kind of share a little bit about is how grief is viewed at the different developmental ages. And so what we know is that children grieve and understand death according to their developmental age, and that grief can interrupt and stall these normal developmental tasks. We also know that children will grieve at different points in their life. So if, let's say, a child experiences the death of a parent at age 8, we'll see it again at 10, 13, 16, 18, and then well into adulthood. And so where we're going to jump into here is really what this looks like at the different ages to be able to equip you with the skills on how to help. But before we jump into that, I wanted to share with you all this very unique statistic. And I know that we're being members of the webinar today, and those watching at home will probably aren't in Texas, but we do have through the JAG Center at Judy's House in Denver, they've created what is known as this childhood bereavement estimation model. So you can go on their website and see what it looks like for the statistics down to your state. But in Texas, and I need to note that this is in 2019 before the pandemic. So I believe, in my professional opinion, that this statistic is going to look different. But in 2019 in Texas, it was estimated that 1 out of every 16 children will experience the death of a parent or a sibling before the age of 18. So if you look at that, that's at least one child in every classroom across our state will have experienced this. And so what we also know is that the number doubles by the time children reach the age of 25. So the relevancy and the importance of you all attending this webinar today and rewatching it is critical. And this is, I would have said that before this year, but definitely now. So to kick us off into our developmental ages, I want to talk about our kids, our 3 to 5 year olds. So at Bose Place, I think one of the things we didn't mention is that we serve ages 3, I like to tell people 3 through 99. And so our 3 to 5 year olds are part of our Little Friends program. And so what we know about kids at this age is that they like the concept of time and space. I don't know if you've worked with 3 and 4 year olds, but there is no concept of later, right? There's just this now. So because of that, the idea that of death being forever doesn't exist. And so they think of death as being temporary or reversible. And so what we hear it being very difficult for them, they'll ask questions repeatedly of like, when is dad going to be done being dead? Or when is dad coming back? Or like, I want to die so I can be with dad too. And these questions can be really frustrating and catch adults off guard. One of the other things, and we'll state this throughout all the age groups, is that there's this use of euphemisms that we use as a society, right? We use things like, he passed away, she went to a better place, and this can get, or they went to sleep, and this can be very confusing for kids, especially kids this young, right? If we use things like they went to sleep, then you start seeing the fear of going to bed. If we use words or euphemisms like they went to heaven, then you'll start getting questions or statements like, I want to go to heaven so I can see daddy. At the funeral, they might ask, are we in heaven? So when we say things like they're gone, questions like, when are they coming back? If we tell them things like, oh, they went to work trip before telling them that their person died, like to buy time, the child can be scared next time that someone goes on a work trip. So just this confusion with euphemisms, and most importantly too, is to know that children grieve in spurts of play. So you might deliver the news and then they go off and play. So one of the activities that we use with kids this age, my mouse just went wild, is this activity about who you're going to call. And so this ability to sit down with children and have this conversation of like, who are you going to call, allows them to think about who is in their support networks. So who are you going to call when you're sad about your person who died, when you have a scary dream, when you need a hug, when you're worried about someone in your life. This is a way, as I mentioned, to be able to identify too, who is that confidant, who can that child go to. We do this with our 3 to 5 year olds, but I think it's also very important to do with our other kids, just to be able to identify that support system. So ways to help our 3 to 5 year olds. Most importantly, it's to respond to the need of nurturance, right? And to know that they're going to have a full range of emotions. Oftentimes we as adults feel or believe that kids don't have the capacity to feel in the same intensity as we do, and that's incorrect. They do. They're just little bodies, right? So you'll see this full range of emotions. Kids will ask questions repeatedly, and so it's important to be able to answer those questions honestly, simply and repeatedly using that concrete language. And so when I mentioned concrete language, this is where it's very important to use the D words, right? To use dead, dying, died. It gives truth to what's happened, and it doesn't confuse kids. It's important to reassure the children that crying and being sad is okay, and none of this is their fault. We also highly encourage allowing the child time to talk about the person who died, because it's their ability to preserve the memory of the person who died. So those are our 3 to 5 year olds, very cute in the building. I know it's the one group that most of us really miss to see in person. So next up, we have our 6 to 9 year olds. So this is generally our younger elementary school. And that here, what we see them doing in terms of their understanding of grief is that they begin to understand that death is final, right? They know that this means forever, and this concept of time exists, but they get very preoccupied with morbid details. And it's almost as though their filter of what to share and when to share go out the window. And so what we hear often is parents sharing how they're at the grocery store with their child, and all of a sudden their kid sees somebody that they know and be like, oh, my daddy died in a car accident, or my brother drowned. And their parents are mortified because they're like, we haven't seen this person in months. And here they are just telling everyone. They're telling people at the cashier. And it's just this insistent need to share too. Arlette mentioned the clingy behavior as a grief indicator for in the social realm of our full bodies. We absolutely see this with kids of this age, this fear of being separated from important people. So you start seeing what looks like separation anxiety quite a bit with kids this age, and this need to just be consistently with their grown-ups in that sense. Kids of this age really act out their feelings rather than verbalizing them, and there's quite a bit of guilt that's associated with the death at this age. So you'll get questions like, was it because I didn't share my toys, or did they know that I love them? Like, did I not love them enough to prevent them from dying? And so one of the activities that we do at Bose Place with this age group specifically is this activity called My House of Feelings. So you see this house, we ask them to draw or write the feelings that they've had lately. And then we encourage them to think about the feelings of the other people who live in their house. And this is trying to get them to understand and see that their grief is part of this familial grief, right? And so how each person grieves differently. So one of the ways, the ways to be able to help kids of this age is, once again, you're going to see this quite a bit, using facts and using concrete language to avoid secrets. And sometimes with deaths that are stigmatized, there is this reluctancy to be honest with children. And I'm here to help encourage you to encourage those who are sharing this difficult news with kids, that kids will ask the questions that they're ready to hear the answers to. So to be honest, because what tends to happen is that adults will talk, right? And then little Joey or Susie will hear the adults talking and then come back to the child and be like, this is what happened, or did you know that this is what happened? And that trust is broken between the child and their caregiver. So it's important to give facts. The structure one right now, I think the pandemic has really thrown a wrench in it, but being able to provide structure at home and at school brings comfort to children, because after a death, it can be really chaotic and it feels like you don't know which way is up, which way is down. But school, you can anticipate what comes next, right? What class comes next, when we go to lunch, when we go outside, that routine brings comfort. It's also really important to be able to reflect back feelings, right? To be able to help children expand their emotional vocabulary so that they're able to verbalize their thoughts and feelings for the future. And then, as Arlette mentioned, grief impacts learning, so really expect learning to be interrupted. So with our next age group is our preteens, the fun age, right? Our 10 to 12-year-olds. And so at this age, kids have a more rational and biological understanding of death. And what we really see I would say most of the kids that we work with, is this concern over the death of the surviving family member. So if it's been a caregiver that dies, there's this consistent concern for their surviving caregiver. And the reason for that is that their biggest fear, or one of their biggest worries, is what will happen to me if you die. We see, once again, the difficulty talking about feelings. So they mask their grief in ways of joking and like almost seeming unconcerned about what's happened. Once again, that interruption with learning rate, that limited attention span, or tolerance about talking about the death. And so one of the activities that we do with kids of this age is this past, present, and future. And so in this space provided, we encourage them to talk about or write or draw the way that life was before, right? Before the death. And then what life looks like now. And then what will life look like in the future? And then to be able to look at what has changed and what can change. And so if, I'll give you an example before, if we've had kids who have said, we used to go to the park, now we don't, and I hope we can go to the park again. And so how can we move throughout that grief journey in that sense? So with this age, how do you help? Once again, it's that honest talking openly about the loss, and to really address the concerns of how this death, how this loss has affected their life. Once again, that structure, that predictability, being prepared to deal with anger. Kids, I mentioned with our 3 to 5 year olds, grieve in spurts of play, but kids are very physical in their grief. So encouraging physical activity, being respectful of every individual's timetable. Like grief doesn't look similar for anyone. And so kids won't follow the same timetable that maybe another child is, or maybe another family member is. So to just acknowledge that grief is going to look really different. And again, learning is going to be interrupted. So then with our teens, here we see that our kids of this age group truly understand death as adults. We see them being very angry and feeling guilt and loss for the loss of hopes and dreams. They take on this increased sense of responsibility. We'll hear often if there's been a caregiver death where the oldest child will take on the responsibilities or the role of that caregiver. They really search for meaning in what this death has been. What does this mean? How does this affect me? And so if we also look at where, I'm going to throw a little developmental theory in here. So if we look at where kids are at this age, right? Like generally kids are looking for their identity, and they're really looking to their peers for what that looks like. And when you throw grief on top of that, oftentimes teens don't want to share, don't want to tell people that a death has occurred. And primarily because they don't want to be labeled as different than their teens, than their peers in that sense. And so what we also know is that at this time, teens tend to pull away from their parents, right? Because that's where they're establishing that identity. And when their death has occurred, sometimes they'll kind of go back to their family. And it can be just this difficult pull of like, who am I? What does this mean? I want to be like my friends, but I'm not, but I'm scared to be away from my friends. So you can hear the differencing of emotions that we have here. It is very important at this point to know like the need for positive coping with teens because they're so vulnerable to finding ways to cope and numb in negative ways. So one of the things and the activities that we do with our kids, our teens specifically, is this shield of support. And in this shield, we ask them to draw or write the people, places, or activities that have been supportive to them. Sometimes it takes time and prompting to help kids identify what that is. But at the end, we've seen great success in kids being able to identify the different, like really what their shield of support looks like. And so how do you help kids this age? Honestly, it's building trust and spending time with them and being open to listen to the story as many times as they need to talk about it. Honesty and openness. Kids of this age and teens really, we've seen them gravitate towards journaling or writing or drawing, this very introspective outlook of how to be able to process their emotions and to really talk about what are those secondary issues that they may have. Like are they stepping into these roles, and who else can they rely on to support to step into those roles? Also, as we mentioned with the other kids, be respectful of their timetable. To be mindful of anniversaries. If you know that a child has experienced the death of someone and that anniversary is coming up, to be aware and mindful that you're going to see different spurts of grief in different ways. Also, special days. Sometimes the big holidays that we know, like the winter holidays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, but then there can be the small ones. Like Valentine's Day or St. Patrick's Day or Halloween or 4th of July. Like, what are those days? Did their family do anything different or anything unique for those days, and what's going to be done now? And as I said, with all the other kids, expect learning to be interrupted. And so that's just how to help our teens. What I want to talk through now is a little bit about what's helpful and not helpful. And so I'm going to start by showing you all this activity that we do in our kids groups that's helpful, not helpful. And the first slide here are the things that aren't helpful. And so I'm going to give you a moment to kind of read on the screen the different things that kids have said, that others have said at them or done to them that have not been helpful in their grief journey. And so some of these are, you'll get over it, laughing at me. The one that really breaks my heart is, go die like your brother. It should have been you. Aren't you over it yet? And it crushes my heart to know that, kids have said this to other kids, or that people have. But what I want to show you now are the things that kids have told us are helpful, right? And so this, I think, is really great. Using the loved one's name, hugs, private note from teachers, saying, I'm here if you need to talk to me, if you need me, I'm here for you. Just listening. And the one in blue, I think, might be a little hard to read. Be yourself when you're around me, and getting cards from my friends. And we did this activity mostly recently in our online groups, and we asked them, what would you do to help someone else who was grieving? And most of them said, I check up on them. And so we do this activity. Here is the worksheet that you can have available as well. You just write on either columns what's helpful and not helpful. Now, I want to share with you all some of the things we've been told on our end of some of the common things that have been said to the bereaved that participants at Bose Place have identified as not helpful. You might look at this list and start cringing at the things, realizing that maybe I have said this to someone, and it's okay. These responses often come off differently than we intend, and we understand why certain things are not helpful. We are less likely to say them again. So I know how you feel. This makes it about you. Lets the focus stay on them, and everyone's experience is different. You need to be strong, may suggest that they should hide their feelings, saying everything's going to be okay. We can't guarantee that. Death causes a lot of changes in people's lives, and it may not be okay, feel okay to them. God has a reason for this. We must allow each person to explore that for themselves if they choose to. As we mentioned, death can challenge religious beliefs, and we just don't want them to assume that we know someone's stance on this right after the death occurs. The saying that they're in a better place and no longer in pain, unless the bereaved person has said that first, it may suggest look at the bright side, or there's a silver lining. And so now I want to share with you some of the things we've been told are helpful. And so being able to say, what has your day been like so far? What's the hardest part of this right now? This is probably my favorite one that I use, and it's one that I use frequently in my personal life, saying, I know I cannot change this, but I can listen and be here for you. To have a better chance at saying something helpful is to keep the focus on the other person and offer them opportunities to share, right? So things like, what do you miss most about them? If we didn't know them, to be able to say how would you describe them? Now, are there any favorite memories you'd like to share? Also helpful, using the deceased person's name or relationship. You know, I talked about the D words and how important that is. It's very important for us to be specific about how we can help, right? Where is the limit of your role and how you can help someone, and can you connect them to somebody else to help fill in the parts that you can't? Encouraging students to share stories and memories of the person who died, and educating parents on different common grief reactions. So I want to share with you all, as we get to the end here, are some bereavement resources. I don't know if you, and we'll make sure to share these resources with Mary Catherine, but really, like, if you haven't been to the Coalition to Support Grieving Students, highly recommend it. It's grievingstudents.org. They have different video modules with resource guides for the companion, and it's specialized by profession. So they have things specific for teachers and counselors and different school administrators. In addition to the Coalition to Support Grieving Students, there's also the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement. And they have PDF documents on various subjects. They have sample letters for templates for notifications if something needs to go out to the school community. There's the Both Place online resource library. We have tons of parent handouts, book recommendations on our website, both in English and Spanish. Arlette mentioned our portal at home, different activities, more resources completely available to you. You just go on the links, you click on what you want, it downloads as a PDF. And since we talked about not everybody on this call is from the Houston region, there is the National Alliance of Grieving Children. And at childrengrieve.org, you can find local and national support programs throughout the entire country. And there's also online educational opportunities for staff. So now we head into questions. So I'll stop sharing my screen and seeing if anyone has any questions for us while I drink some water.
While we're waiting on questions, one of the things that it just kind of occurred to me, great presentation. And I was thinking as you were talking through the different age groups, how important it is as a school, both as a family, that maybe some of the things that we talk about, we do some of this preemptively. You know, we learn as adults, whether as adult administrators, parents, or whatever, we learn how to communicate with kids preemptively almost, so that we're learning how to be direct communicators to our children. We're talking about things. I think I definitely think that as parents or teachers, we want to protect, we want to say, you know, oh, it's not that big of a deal, or, oh, it'll get better. And that's not helpful. And I know that even, you know, when you're not in a grieving situation, that's not helpful. When your kid gets broken up with, or somebody takes a toy away, we try to candy coat it. And I'm very interested in that in terms of how we respond.
Yeah, no, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head, right? Like, our kids are entrusted to us for us to protect them, and then life comes and curveballs get thrown and we can't protect them, and then we have to deliver the most difficult news possible. We know that this is going to change them and their life in one way or another, and so oftentimes, yes, many parents will try to just really hold on to that protection. But as I mentioned, you know, that this ability to trust your caregivers, as hard as these conversations are, they are important to come from the people that kids trust the most. And so I agree with you wholeheartedly, Mary Catherine. The more that we can do, like, there are so many times that we give these presentations and we're told, I wish I knew it last week when I was talking to someone, right? Or yesterday when I was talking to someone. I can guarantee you, as someone who has been in this field for a couple of years, there are times that I will sit there and be like, I wish I knew this back when I did this. And so the shoulda, coulda, woulda. So I should have done this, I would have done this, I could have done this, really then turn into, like, what can I do now? And how can I do it now?
Well, I appreciate your comment also about, you know, anything when we get into theology, you know, all of our schools come at this from a Episcopal identity perspective. Some have chaplains, some don't. Some that pastoral care kind of falls upon the head of school, but so important to be careful about what we say about God's plan.
Right.
You know, again, I mean, this is frequently coming from a place of wanting to comfort and wanting to, you know, reassure. But man, you want to talk about potentially not helpful for a variety of reasons. Wow. So I love the very practical comments you had on just things you can say that kiddos have said, wow, that was really helpful. But you know, when I talk with chaplains, one way to look at this is, you know, there's a time to do theology and there's a time to just be pastorally present. And sometimes in a desire to do theology at a time where we really don't need to do theology, we can unintentionally cause harm. And so I appreciated that comment.
Yeah, I think one of the things that occurs to me, and I know this is, I can tell you from my own personal perspective, I struggle with it, is we want to help. And we think that helping is fixing. And, you know, I'm learning a lot around just the sitting and uncomfortable with people and sitting in the grief, and it doesn't matter, you know, let's say it's not even, we can even take this information as teachers and as administrators and apply it to just the grief of, like y'all talked about, Arlette talked about in the beginning, about the grief of the loss of things through the pandemic. You know, the grief with an 18-year-old who lost, they didn't get to go to their prom, or they didn't get to graduate, or a college kid. I mean, you could name a billion things of loss over the last year. And I think what our natural, I know my natural propensity is to go, oh, well, there's more coming and it'll get better. And I really cringed with the it'll get better, because that's what I want to happen. And that's what,
That's your
but
Enneagram.
I know that's my 7. That's absolutely true. But I really appreciate hearing from both of you to say to us as people who don't work in this field, hey, that's not helpful. Because you think it is.
No, absolutely. One of the, I think, best things I learned in grad school was this acronym WAIT. It's why am I talking? Right. And so I take this into every interaction that I have, right? And right, as you were saying, Mary Kat, this, and like we're conditioned as humans to jump in and help, and whatever that, however we define that. And so this WAIT, why am I talking? Taking that step back, like, am I about to say something because I'm uncomfortable with what's being said? Is what I'm about to say going to breathe forth this incredible support, or am I just trying to fill the void of what has been said? And so I hear you completely. I mean, I'm sure my husband would say there's sometimes I could wait, right? But I think that we can all work towards that, like truly hearing, like, how can I be supportive to you? Because I think that's another piece, like, how can I provide you support? And Arlette can jump in.
Yeah, I mean, even as in bereaved, you know, like in this world, and sometimes like we don't even have the right words to say. So, but and it's something that can bring comfort to all, to know that as long as you're just there listening, that you want to learn more about their person, that helps the child so much. You know, and yeah, there's going to be questions, like I mentioned, like I'm not going to know the answer to the question, but I'm glad that you asked me, or I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation. And that simply helps, you know, the child in understanding that somebody's listening, that somebody's there, that they can go to this person for support, you know, whenever they need it.
Yeah, and we have a question from Kristen. I wonder about resources for helping our non-grieving students interact with their grieving classmates. That's do you guys want to address that?
Do you want me to jump in, Arlette? Okay, so the Coalition for Grieving Students has some tutorials and material on almost like grief within the classroom and how to help support your students to support the bereaved who's coming back. And one of the things we didn't mention within this presentation, because we have another one that talks more into supporting grieving students, but it's before the child, and this is pre-pandemic when we were in classrooms all the time, right? And so I acknowledge that, but before the child returns to the classroom, to be able to have a conversation with the child and say, how would you like me to tell the class, or would you like to tell the class? And giving that ownership to the child, to the student, about how their story is being told. And so much of that, how to help your class or fellow students be supportive, really comes down to how that child wants to be supported, how that child wants to share their narrative, like share their story. And so I would recommend the Coalition of Grieving Students because they have, I mean, an extensive website on different toolkits available, but my practical like last line is speaking to the student, because no two students are alike into what they want and how they want to be supported. And that I think ultimately that's the takeaway, is no two people walk the same grief journey, and being understanding of each person's grief reaction.
I think that's powerful because to your point about, teachers, what we do for a living is give answers to some extent, right? That's what we do for a living. And so to not have answers is hard. And it's got to be intentional. And to ask questions, it's got to be intentional, because that's not what we typically, we're the givers of the information. We're not necessarily asking the questions, and that's a whole nother conversation around how, if we're good, what kind of teachers we are. But I appreciate what you're saying. And I think that's a really important point. So, and we're going to have all of that information that you've talked about, all of those resources, all of that is going to be available on the website when we send your this PowerPoint to Pat to put on the website. And so that'll be just additional resources that people can have.
Christina, Arlette, thank you so much. We're at the top of the hour, so I want to honor people's times. But thank you so much for all the work you're doing at Beau's Place, and all of the families that you are helping through such a challenging time. And also thank you for sharing some of your wisdom with us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having us.
You bet. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.